We're gonna get started. Today we're gonna take a look at the third lesson. This is really about animating text, but it's really, when you think about it, we don't want to think about like just one piece at a time. Text will act like objects. They'll have some common things that they can apply. So whether it's effects, position, opacity, tracking, and motion. So we're gonna take a look at a couple of different things today, which I think will do a nice job of leading us into our first project, which we're gonna jump into and start in on after the lesson. I'm gonna walk you through the steps, talk to you about the basics a little bit, and then show you some samples of some stuff that's been done in the past to give you an idea of kind of what we're looking for. So first thing that we're gonna take a look at today is jumping right into After Effects and getting started. There's a couple different lesson files that we're gonna start off with today, so let's jump into Blackboard and we'll go from there. So if you take a look in Blackboard, again, we're under assignments, and then here it is for animating text. Here is the lesson 3 zip file. So if you click on that and download it, it should throw it in your downloads folder, and there's gonna be 3 files in there. It's a PSD file. It's just a Photoshop file that's pre-built. It's a logo. We've got this background video that's going to play behind it as we add in other pieces. And if you listen carefully, you won't hear it through the feed, but there's like audio behind it. It's just kind of underwater sounds. And then we've got this PSD, it just says location. So we're going to take a look at importing all these objects, kind of specific ways of importing them and working with these assets, and then kind of building something just almost exactly what you're going to be doing for this first project is kind of reflected in this lesson today. So those are your files that you're going to be working with. And then when we're done, we're going to take a look at a simple title card, and that'll be underneath projects. We'll jump into that once we're done with the lesson. So if you guys have any questions as we're working, please let me know. Just as an update for you, a couple things quick. I did send out updates on grades, so everything that's been submitted to me as of, I believe, Friday has been graded. Anything that was sent over the weekend did not get graded yet just because I've been out of town. So I'll be hitting that stuff over the next day or two, just getting all that stuff updated for you. Remember, if you see a 0 in the grade book, it does not mean that you can't get credit for it. It just means that I don't have it yet from you. So please make sure if you're missing something, just send it over to me, and make sure you want to send over everything as an MP4 file. I'll probably give you the best results. The second thing that I wanted to hit on was Remind. I just sent everybody an email this morning, and I saw quite a few of you jumped in to do it. Like right now, I'm on campus in an empty classroom. I feel like as we go throughout the semester, more and more you may get more comfortable just working from home as you get more comfortable with the software, that type of thing. I also want to have that Remind software or that Remind piece available to you guys, because instead of you having to check your email to get notifications, you just click that link in the email that I sent you, and what'll end up happening is you enter in your phone number, and then I can just send out basically like mass texts to you guys, like giving you updates on due dates, if we're going to move a session to just virtual, if there's campus closing, if there's any stuff that you guys need to know about. That way I can just connect with you automatically like that. So just kind of something else to keep in mind. And again, all lessons are going to be recorded. Everything we're going to do today is already posted up on the YouTube channel from last semester. I feel like this is probably going to be a better demo. So as soon as I'm done with this and recording it, I'll have this thing posted as well for you guys so that you can see the steps. It'll be posted under announcements, and then it'll also be updated on the YouTube channel. That just takes a little bit longer for YouTube to process everything. So that should kind of give you an update as far as like where we're at with projects, due dates. Next week, we're gonna do lesson 4. We're gonna have a little bit of time for you to kind of share and give feedback on your project if you have any questions on it. And then just kind of moving forward, we'll be knocking out one of these lessons every week. So to get started, what I wanna take a look at is I'm gonna open up a new After Effects project, and I wanna close this one and not save it just because I had some stuff in that I wanted to test before we got to that. So minimize media encoder. Oh, let me reopen After Effects here. What we're going to be doing is importing this fishswim.move file. Now, a lot of times what ends up happening is you'll be given either a very specific size that you need to create your footage at, or you're just going to work with footage that's already at the correct size. So in this case, I have footage that's already correctly formatted. This is just a QuickTime movie, but I can see that this is a 1280 by 960, so it's not like super high res, but that's what I'm going to be working with. So assume that this is just kind of like a little animation, like title card thing, maybe like for Instagram, something like that. Now, what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to create a new composition, but because I'm building this thing from existing footage, I'm just going to tell it I want to make this from footage. So when I click on this button, it's going to pop open a window and ask me, okay, well, what footage do you want to create from? So I'm going to grab this fishswim.move, and there it is. That's the right thing. I can play and even see a little preview. That looks good. I'll click OK, and I'm just going to import this as footage because this is just going to be stuff that floats and just kind of sits in the background. So I'll hit open. It drops it in there and automatically fills my timeline with this. Also notice that this is 13 seconds of footage, so it automatically makes the entire project 13 seconds long. You can always change your composition settings, how your actual file is built for length, for not only not for the overall project, but for individual layers. So if I go into composition, I can see comp settings, and here, there's my 1280 by 960 that I saw before. My frame rate's at 60 frames per second, so it's a little bit faster. And my duration is 13 seconds. So if I wanted to shrink it or lengthen it, I can always do it that way. You're never stuck. One of the things that's going to come up in your project is I'm going to ask you for every 10-second, a 10-second clip. So say that you bring in footage or you create a new document. This is where you're going to change that underneath duration. So 13 seconds is fine. I think that looks good. If I want to, I can play it back. We've already seen what it does. I'm just going to kind of scrub forward. It's kind of like low res, but that's all right because I'm not super concerned about it. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to bring in a couple different things. We're going to set a text layer. We're going to take a look at using Adobe Fonts. If you guys haven't used that, I'll show you how to kind of get access to a ton of different fonts. We're going to have some additional footage that we're going to drop in, those logos, kind of some additional text layers, that type of stuff. So first thing I want to do is I want to just build myself a new text layer. And we saw that to do that, all I need to do is come up here to my type tool, and I'm just going to click once. And as soon as I click, it gives me a layer. So here, I'm going to call this Snorkel Tours. And what I want to do is I want to play around with fonts. Now, I already have my fonts selected, but the way I got to this is a very specific way. If you go up to your File menu, there's this Add Fonts from Adobe option. Because you have a Creative Cloud account, this is available for you. So what it does is it's going to fire open a separate browser, and it's going to ask you, what do you want? Now, nice part about this is I can grab any one of these fonts except for there's tons and tons and tons of them. So if I'm looking for like a specific style, like horror or brush pen or geometric, I can do that, or I can search in other ways. So say that I'm looking for a sans serif. I want medium weight, medium X height, low contrast, medium width. I want a standard font, that'll be fine. So as I'm clicking, it's basically just going through every one of these fonts and kind of narrowing it down into all the different versions. I still have 14 pages. The one that I'm looking for, it's called Kaluna Sans. If I know the name of a font, I can also search up here. So I'll just hit Kaluna. And there's all the different Kaluna versions. I want the Sans version, so I'm going to jump on that. And then it shows me previews of what each one would look like. Now, if right now it just says like, here's my sample text. I can enter my own text if I want. So here, let's see what it looked like with that actual text I have in. If I want to bump it up a little bit, I can do that. What I selected was, I have this regular, and I also have this bold. I think this bold is going to be the best looking one for me. So what I'm going to do is if I have a font that I want to use out of any of these, like maybe I want the semi-bold, I just click Activate Font. Now, if you're not logged into your browser with your Creative Cloud account, it's going to pop up in a window asking you to log in. That's where you click the Login with Google option. There's 3 buttons. It's the top one. Tell it that you're working as part of a school. Use your MATC Gmail and password. It'll get you in, verify it. And once it's active, it'll activate it automatically, and it'll be available for you in After Effects. So now that I have this selected, I can take a look here, and here's my Kaluna Sans. If I wanted to like favorite this thing, remember, you can check these little stars. So as you go through, it's all alphabetical. But if there's stuff that you find that you're using more often than others, so like say I'm going to use this a lot, it'll jump this right to the top of the list. So there's Kaluna Sans. I want to make sure I set this thing to bold. So that looks good. I'm going to bump up my font size. Let's get a little bit bigger. I'm also going to take a look at paragraph because this is going to have some effects applied to it. I want to make sure that my paragraph settings are set to center. And I'm going to grab my move tool, and I'm just going to kind of snap this thing like right in the middle. Now what I want to do is I want to fit this thing to the width of my comp. I want to just kind of automatically snap to it. So rather than doing like a bunch of playing around with it with trying to like adjust it or whatever, what I can do is I can go up to my layer menu, and I can go down to where it says transform, and notice you have this fit to comp width, fit to comp height. So if I fit to comp width, it automatically scales it right up to the full width, which works out well. And then I can just drag this up, and if I hold my shift key, it'll snap it straight up. I'll throw it right up at the top here. So that's just kind of a quick way of getting that all put together. But what I want to take a look at is playing around with some animation on this thing. I want to shrink this thing up, or I'm going to play with my shrinking on this thing. So right now it's at full size. What I'm going to do is with this layer selected, I want to see all my transform options. So if I click on this drop down, I can click to here to transform, and these are all the different things that are kind of automatically applied to any effect. So if I was going to move this thing around, scale it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this opacity. So I'm going to leave it at this big full size on the first frame. And then I'm going to go all the way to 3 seconds. And at 3 seconds, oh, I'm sorry, not opacity. grab the wrong one. I want to check my scaling. That's the size. So then I'm going to go to my 3-second mark, and here I'm going to take this and I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. So now because I use that little clock, you'll see they got this little point here and one here. Now it starts sliding in and scaling. Now, once I have these things dropped into place and I'm happy with how they look, there's also a way I can kind of make it look a little bit more smooth. So here where this little diamond is, I'm going to right click on this thing, and there's this thing called Keyframe Assistant. I'm going to do easy ease in and out. This kind of smooths off that animation a little bit, makes it a little more subtle. So that's my final frame, so I'll set it to out. Here, I'll right click, and I'll set it to ease in. And now it kind of slowly starts working, gets to the point, and then smooths out. Gives you kind of a nice, more subtle look. So anytime I'm doing anything with like any kind of transitional work, I like to have as much kind of smooth blending as possible. I feel like if animation gets a little too subtle or a little too jumpy, it doesn't have a very finished look to it. So now that I have that thing taken care of and I kind of like scaled this thing down, what I want to take a look at next is applying some text or some effects to this thing. Now there's a couple different ways that you can look at effects, and I'm done with this, so I'm going to collapse that down and bring it back to here. We saw that you could take a look at this effects and presets, and it's not super user friendly. There's also a way that you can browse presets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my animation menu, and you see how it says browse presets here? What this does is this opens up Adobe Bridge, and it shows me all these folders. So if I was going to use text things or shape things, or if I had sound that I was going to try to apply sound effects to my audio clips, it's all in here, so you can kind of browse it just like you would like a filter library in Photoshop or in Illustrator. So I'm going to grab text. I got all these different versions here. I'll grab this organic one and see what's in here. And if I click on this, it shows me kind of a little preview of what that looks like. So I want to use Ripple. I don't know if this is an issue with how I'm logging in here, but it's not showing me previews. But if I apply it, it does snap on. Now, here's my issue. You see where I had my text set? I was at my 3-second marker. I want to undo that. I don't want that effect to happen there. I want that effect to happen at the 0-second mark. So remember, where we are on the timeline matters. So I'm going to make sure I snap all the way back to the beginning, because as this thing fades in, I want that ripple effect to snap onto it. So jump back in here. I can double click ripple. And now, because I set it there, now it kind of starts rippling in as it scales down. So it's kind of doing two things at once. That makes sense? All right, so now that we got that taken care of, it's gonna it's moving, it's kind of working at two things at once. We're gonna grab another little chunk of text and we're gonna play around with this, but we're gonna use this one a little bit differently. So before I do that, I'm gonna jump back and I'm gonna reset back to my 0-second mark. I always like to be at the beginning before I bring in the next step to kind of remind myself where I'm at in my timeline. I'll close my presets and jump back into my project pane so I can see everything. And I'm done with the snorkel tour, so I'm gonna collapse all this. I don't wanna see my timeline to be full with a bunch of stuff that I'm not gonna be using anyways. So I'm going to jump back in here. I've got this location.psd. I'm going to drag this thing over. And here it says import kind comp, editable layer styles, blah, blah, blah. I think this looks good. It's a comp, and I want to make sure I can edit my layer styles. So I'll click OK. And notice that I got this folder, that it's got the actual document. This is the composition that I want to work with. Now, before I drop this thing down, I want to take a look at the comp settings on this specific piece that I brought in. So here it's showing how big the document is, or how big that additional layer is, but also shows me this duration. I want to check that. This is at 13 seconds. That's good. Because then when I drag this thing down, I'll put it kind of between the two layers. I want it to be able to appear the entire time. I don't want it to only show for 3 or 4 seconds. I want to make sure that it's there. So when you're bringing in a comp, before you drag it down on your timeline, it's always a good idea to right click and do that comp settings check just to make sure your length is right. Now, with this piece, I don't want it to happen right away. I don't want to see it until maybe like after this effect is done, so maybe right around the 4-second mark. So what I can do is I can actually go to the front of this clip, and you see how if I zoom in here, I can click on this and I can crop in. It won't be visible until I get to that 4-second mark. So now that here, this is where I'm actually seeing it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and actually adjust this. So if I double click on this composition, it takes me back into this kind of isolation view. And I can edit this thing as its own document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the whole object. And you can see I can't really do anything yet. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to actually convert this thing out into editable text. So once I have it in there, I'm going to go to Layer. down to create, and then I'm going to convert this into that editable text. So now, if I double click this thing, it maintains all those settings, color, styling, all that. Maybe I want to add like a stroke or something to it. I want to highlight it all because I want to make sure the stroke appears on everything. So maybe I'll go like a light blue or something like that. But now all those changes that I made, because I'm making them in this comp view, once I close this comp on location, now it automatically updates it. So here I can take this, I can bring it into position. Maybe I'll just drop it like right underneath here, even with that size. And again, the reason I'm doing it at 4 seconds is because I want my alignment, I want nice even tensions on my edges. So now I can go back to this point, and I'm going to throw an effect on this thing. So I know what I'm looking for. It's called raining text. I was having an issue with it not working correctly. Again, I'm having some bridge issues here. I tried to again, it's another one of those where I try to apply it on there and it's just not looking right. But again, you can apply any effect you want. I'm just throwing these on there for an example, but there's other things you want to try or you want to play around with in Bridge. That's a great kind of time to start previewing these things and taking a look at them. So here I've got my raining characters. Let's see if it works now. Drop it onto my location and it looks like, yeah, it's doing this echo thing. I'm not sure why it's doing it, but I feel like if I went in and just went in a Bridge, like let me undo that one. Let's just try and throw another one on from Bridge. This is kind of similar. Let's see if it, yeah, and it looks like it's not applying it correctly onto that layer. So I'm just going to leave this one on here and I'll just use that echo effect for now. And now that echo effect will just kind of kick in and apply on this. And I'll need that to render out before I can see everything. So that's really the idea with it, is as you're kind of dropping that stuff in there, you're making your edits, you're putting it in, and then you're just playing around with your settings on it. So let's do that one more time. Let's drop in one more chunk of text. So I'm going to go back up. I'm going to click with my text tool and just click once to set a new text point. And notice it gives me an empty text layer in my timeline. So for this one, we're just going to have one more layer. Blue crab charters. Ooh. Check my spelling. And again, I want to pay attention to how I'm setting up this text. So here, I'm going to go back to my Kaluna Sands. I'm going to set my fill color to white. I think I can leave my stroke color with that kind of bluish shade, but I do want to pay attention to my paragraph. Because this thing is going to do a special effect, I want it to apply along the left side. And I'm going to turn up my size a little bit on this. So I think that looks good for a starting point. I'm just going to kind of snap it down here and just kind of keep it even with that S. And now that I have this thing, why can't I spell crab? There we go. Knew it had me. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to apply one more kind of effect to this thing. What I want to do is I want to play around with tracking. So with that on here, what I can do is under my effects and presets, there's an increase, decrease. I'm going to increase my tracking on this thing. So now, because I had it at the 6.5 second mark, at that point, it's going to spread this way out. Now, I think this is probably too big. So what I'm going to do is, hold my shift key. I'm going to scale it so that it increases right out to that full width. So now it starts here, the animation kicks in, and then it appears there. So far, so good. It's kind of doing all the stuff that I want. Now, notice on my text, my blue crab charters, how it pops in here and it starts showing at this point. I don't want to see this until it actually starts. So I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to crop in here. I'm going to crop away that footage so I don't see it. The other thing too is now that I have this text, I can also take a look at my transform stuff. I don't want this to just like pop in and start working. I want to fade this in. So on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this little stopwatch. At this point, I don't want to see it. I want my opacity to be 0. But by like maybe the 7 second mark, I'm going to check it again and I'm going to bump it way up to 100%. So now I've got this little fade as that effect starts going through. So far, so good. Making sense? So now if I hit play, everything fades in, that appears. My flicker, I'm not happy with how that's looking. I'm gonna have to maybe go back and adjust that. For this one, you guys can apply any effect you want, doesn't really matter. And then here, this fades in and appears, and now I've got all this extra time. So what I want to do is I want to add in one more element onto this. I've got some text layers, I've got a background. What I want to do next is I want to take a look at dropping in this logo. So I'm going to drag this thing right over, and I want to make sure I close my presets because I want to see it in my project pane. And just like we did with that location text, I'm going to throw this blue crab logo in here. I want it as an editable version. I'm going to double check the comp settings. I'm going to right click, make sure this thing is 13 seconds long, and it is, so that's good because it's the same length as the rest of the footage. And now, just like everything else, it collapsed down. I'm going to throw my logo into my timeline. There it is, and it's just sitting there the entire time, right dead center in the middle. What I want to do is I want to make this thing move, and I want to make this thing kind of fade in as it moves. So here, Snorkel Tours pops open. I've got my location. I've got the name of my business. So what I want to have happen is maybe right around the 7.5 second mark, I want to make this thing start doing something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to make sure I hold my shift key so that it stays proportional. And I'm going to have it start right down here. Now what I'm going to do is expand out here so I can see my transform options. And what I want to do is I want to play around with my position. I'm going to start it right here. Now because I haven't adjusted anything, it's just sitting this entire time in this corner. But I want to make it move. And in order to do that, I need to tell it I'm going to change its position by alerting it by clicking on this position. So this is my start point, right? Now what I'm going to do is by the time we get to maybe like the 9.5 second mark, I want this thing to be in a different location. I want it to be in the middle. I'm going to hold my shift key, and you know what? Let's do this. Let's not just do the position, let's do the scaling too. So here it moves, and instead of just moving, let's turn that scaling up as well. And notice I got this little line here. What that line is for is that's showing me how it's going to move. That's the kind of track that it's going to go on. So I can control where it's going to start and where it's going to end. And also notice I got these little kind of slider points, almost like you'd see in Illustrator. That's going to control how this thing curves. So here, how it's going to start there and pop right into the center of the screen at full size. Now the other thing I can do is maybe I want to fade this as well. So now I'm going to turn on opacity, and I'm going to shut that opacity off because I don't want to see it. But maybe by the time it gets to about here, I want to see that at full opacity. So I'm going to kind of make this like a fast one. So it kind of fades in quickly. And then if I want to, like with my rotation, with my opacity, remember I've got this easy in, easy out. So if I right click on that little diamond, I can tell easy in, easy out. And I can apply that to all of them. And that'll just give me a little bit more of a smooth transition. So then it appears, plays through, and it's done. Let me go back and just play back one more time. And because this thing is at 60 frames per second, I'm getting a nice smooth animation through all of it. So any questions on any of that stuff? I think the big thing, and if you can really take this away from today's lesson, is getting comfortable with getting a start point and an end point and using these little clocks and these little sliders to control kind of like things getting bigger or smaller, fading in and out, or moving or rotating. That's another way of kind of doing it. You can apply this to anything, whether it's a regular object. So here maybe I'm going to play with rotation. So maybe I'm going to rotate this thing like, I don't know, 84 degrees, we'll call it. Now, by the time I get to my final position, I'm going to set this thing back to 0. So as long as I check that box, now it's going to kind of rotate and spin into place. So once you get comfortable with kind of feeling out these just basic transformation tools and then adding in some effects or kind of playing around with that effects browser and getting comfortable with it, it starts becoming really powerful really quickly. You can do a lot with very little. I mean, all I've got here is basically 3 text layers and a little logo, but by applying some kind of additional pieces to it, throwing it on a moving background, it starts to become a lot more of an engaging piece. And that's really the big idea behind motion graphic design. It's not that it's necessarily like the fanciest thing in the world. It's just that by kind of creating a little bit of kind of kinetic movement and motion, you're getting a much better looking finished product with things. So now that I have all that stuff kind of taken care of and I'm happy with how it all looks, what I'm going to do is throw this thing out into the media encoder. But let's take a look at this actually. There's one other thing that's kind of cool. If you take a look here, if you hover over this, there's a thing called motion blur. So if you do have something moving, you can apply this motion blur So anytime I have text moving, take a look at what happens here. There's kind of like a real, and let me play it back in real time. It's going to have to re-render because of this effect. What motion blur is going to do is it's going to kind of add like a little bit of a blend so it doesn't look so like perfectly crisp. So if you watch on the logo here, it kind of smoothed it out a little bit. And that's the last finishing touch I want to put on it, is making sure that I apply that motion blur. So now that I'm good, I'm going to stop and save this thing. So make sure you're saving. And then whenever you're done, obviously you can take this thing out and add it into the media encoder queue. So I'm going to go to comp and add it to the queue. So I can render this thing out as an MP4 to be submitted. It's going to take a second for it to pop up in here. And just like we've been working before, just make sure you're saving things out as an MP4, making sure you're saving them on your desktop and then sending me that. We may get to a point where these files start getting a little bit bigger. If that's the case, then we'll start looking at putting those things in Google Drive drop folders, and I actually will have one for you for the first project. So this looks good. Let me start the render. And actually, I'm going to stop this. I want to pay attention to where I'm saving this. And somebody had a question about this earlier this week. Let me stop and do this. I'm going to save this thing. And I'm just going to throw it right onto my desktop. Untitled project's fine. Now, when I add this thing into the render queue, I want to pay attention to where I'm putting this. So should pop up one more time back in here. I want to look at the path of where this is going. Right now, here's my name. If I click on this here, this output file, where it's highlighted in blue, that's where it's going to ask me, where do you want to put this thing? I'm just going to have it go right onto my desktop. But again, if you're not finding your files, that's okay. Looks good. Now I can render it because now I know where it's actually going. I can see like here, it's going right to my desktop. And then that should render off onto my desktop, and that's what you guys are going to email me. So I'm going to let this thing cook while this is going. What I want to do is, oh, and I might be rendering off the whole thing. There we go. Okay. So while this is going, what I want to take a look at is I want to jump back into Blackboard and take a look at the first project and then kind of show you an example of what I'm talking about. So if you jump back in here underneath projects, there's this title card. Now the idea is that you're going to create a simple title card for the client or product of your choosing. It really does not matter to me if you like say that maybe you're in the digital media prep class and you're doing some stuff for a Kickstarter that you want to include in your portfolio. This is all kind of good stuff to mix in with that. But what you will need is a royalty-free video clip as a background, royalty-free music that's faded in and out. We will talk about audio fading next week. It's going to be part of the lesson. I'm going to spend some time next week on that. Just get it included for right now. Don't worry about like fine-tuning any of it. You'll need at least 2 text layers, a clipped out logo in Photoshop saved as either a PSD or a PNG file transparency. You'll need at least 2 effects or presets, and you'll need at least 2 of those manual animations that I showed you. Opacity, position, rotation, movement, any of those types of things will work. As far as final file, you're going to set this thing up at a 720, 29.7 seconds. It'll be 10 seconds long for your comp, and your finished MP4 file will be saved in this Google Drive folder. If you take a look at it, I actually have stuff in here still from last semester under the submit files here. I'm going to throw it in just like a legacy folder, but if you guys want to take a look at some of the stuff that's been done in the past, again, all I need is to finish like MOV or MP4 files. But if you take a look here, like where was a good one? I think Adams was kind of cool. This should give you an idea. So you can see 10 seconds isn't super long, but as we're kind of scrubbing through this as an idea, we've got the background that fades in. It's a video clip. Text slides in, or objects move in along with opacity. The logo does a scale just like we did today. So again, he kind of did a lot of the pieces that were very much like we did during the lesson. He just did it with something that was kind of more specific. This was actually like a piece that he had done for the digital media prep class, so it just became part of like a bigger package of just stuff he did. And he ended up using a lot of this stuff as a way to actually get a job doing some motion graphic stuff for Wheel and Sprocket. He actually does their in-house stuff now. So when you guys are building projects, especially when you start looking at like 3rd, 4th semester stuff, I know it's like fun to do things that are fun, but it's also not a terrible idea to start building out stuff that you can include in your portfolio. And the nice part about this stuff is it shows really well on websites, and that's the thing that I'm going to be doing with you guys in the digital media prep class in the 4th semester. Some of you may be in it right now. And if not, you're going to be kind of getting close to that as well. So that is what I got for you guys for this week. So by the start of class next week, all I need is the lesson 3 MP4 finish, where you're animating your 3 layers and making your logo kind of move in and slide. Save that as an MP4 and get that to me, and then you'll get started on this. This 10-second animation is not due next week. I want to make sure that you have all the assets prepared and put together in an After Effects file. And then next week after the demo, I'm just going to use Open Lab Time to kind of check in with where you're at. I'm going to do a quick review of some audio stuff, like how to fade sound, like how to bring in an MP3 file, fade it in, fade it out, all that kind of stuff. Other than that, that's pretty much what I got for you guys for this week. So if there's any questions, I'll be hanging around. Otherwise, I'll have this video posted hopefully within the next, I don't know, 20 minutes or so onto Blackboard, and then get it processed up on YouTube for you. So if you have any questions, I'll be hanging around. Otherwise, have a good week, and I will see you next week.
All right.